Order. End of question time. The clerk will now proceed to read the notice of motion.
Item 1, a notice of motion standing in the name of Assistant Professor Mahdev Mohan.
Assistant Professor Mahdev Mohan.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this House recognizes that a love for learning is the foundation of our future and calls on the government to partner together with the people to ensure accessible, inclusive, and lifelong education for all learners. Mr. Speaker, I'll proceed with your permission. As I look at the third-generation leaders seated across from me, I realize that across the many years, they share one thing in common. And no, it's not which football team they support for the World Cup finals. It's the fact that Dr. Ng En Hen, DPM's Mr. Teo Chee Hean, as well as Mr. Dharman Shanmugaratnam, have all cut their teeth in the Ministry of Education. They've led, enabled, and elevated this ministry. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the motion I propose, and that is seconded and supported by my 8 fellow NMP colleagues and 4 other elected members of Parliament, is indeed inspired by 2 fourth-generation former education ministers. First, Mr. Ng Chee Meng, who encouraged the NMPs to consider how a love for learning should be instilled within the education system, especially in the formative preschool years. And second, Mr. Heng Swee Keat, whom many educators, even today, look up to for his path-breaking choices and ideas. Long before any call for greater equality in the education system, Minister Heng asked that every student should be an engaged learner, regardless of background or ability. He said that to support this, we will need every teacher to be a caring educator, every parent a supportive partner, and of course his trademark quotation, every school a good school. Today our motion paints a portrait of students, educators, schools, and parents. It questions the assumptions about individual stakeholders and system designers collectively. Both bear responsibility to improve the future of education in Singapore. Improvements that ensure accessible, inclusive, and lifelong education for all learners. We speak to this House, Mr. Speaker, as academics, educators, professionals, business persons, and parents keenly interested in the future of Singapore's education system. We ourselves are Singaporeans who have benefited from a world-class education system. And our education system is that. But we also know that the most important lessons that you learn is to cherish the ability to give back to society whenever you can. To always be independent-minded, ever ready to question the status quo for the sake of progress. And ready to refine the methods that have worked in the past but may not be so productive today, or may even be outmoded. Here's a snapshot, Mr. Speaker, of what we will cover in this motion. Ms. Kwek Xiao Yin will highlight the importance of recognizing the talents of every student. She will suggest ways to refine how assessments are conducted in primary and secondary school, even taking a leaf, perhaps, from what preschools are currently doing. Mr. Louis Ng will further ask that performance-based rankings of teachers should be reviewed. He also asks that preschool and lower primary students should be encouraged to play and explore, that we should not be overly focused on academic content at this formative early stage of education. Mr. Kok Heng Learn will suggest how humanities education should be promoted and asks a controversial question: is it time to do away with the PSLE? Ms. Shah Yong Yong and Ms. Rahayu Mazam asked that special education schools and mainstream primary schools and secondary schools be encouraged to work together to ensure that students with special needs are integrated in settings that are appropriate and that meet their needs. Mr. Azmoon Ahmad proposes ways to ensure social mobility and national integration are best preserved as we go forward. He also suggests that we should look into multiple strategies, not a one-size-fits-all formula. Professor Randolph Tan asks that we build on the strengths of the current education system and anticipate the challenges of technological disruption with effective and future-ready policies that are already being deployed in other comparable jurisdictions. Ms. K. Dhanalakshmi similarly asks if our institutes of higher learning have matched the new opportunities that have arisen and whether old parameters of success come with risks and may not always be applicable anymore. And Mr. Ganesh Rajaram will share why sports education and DSA should be better insulated from tuition and mismanaged expectations from coaches and parents alike. I have 3 points, Mr. Speaker, in my own speech. The first is about tuition and false advertising. I put together a photo collage, which Mr. Speaker kindly reminded me may be too much to actually be shown up. But this collage is something that I collected from just a visit to Coronation Plaza. Promise incredible results and are equally insidious. They suggest, in one example, that an A-star average in Chinese can be secured in just 24 hours if you choose that particular tuition agency. They suggest that you will be guaranteed a PSLE score of 279, much higher than I ever got, if you just go for this particular tuition agency. They suggest that they have a 91% proven track record of A's and A-stars. And I ask myself, should this be the way that tuition for primary school 10-year-olds should be advertised? Saying that you will get results, but for a price. Forget the process. Forget the love for learning, a subject through a dedicated guidance, peer support, and patience. These advertisements and the tuition agencies that produce and disseminate them should, with respect, Mr. Speaker, be regulated. Not only because they may be false and misleading, but because they promote gaming the education system. They extol quick solutions, and well-to-do parents will fork out the cash for these quick solutions. Studies show that excessive tuition can harm rather than help a child. And yes, parents and children should be cautioned and counseled, but the preoccupation with grades must change, Mr. Speaker. And I invite the Ministry to indicate what else it plans to do going forward on its part. As Minister Ong revealed at the Committee of Supply debates, students from Singapore have consistently come out top in the Programme for International Student Assessment, or PISA, and the Trends in International Math and Science Study, TIMSS, rankings for decades. We did very well this year as well. Yet does this necessarily mean that Singaporean students are ready for the brave new world of tomorrow? Or does it only suggest that we are exam smart as a nation? After all, companies from countries that do very well PISA-wise barely feature in other rankings for business, for companies, of the top 25 most successful companies, as an example, in Forbes. They're not there. So I ask, what can or should we do differently? Are there plans for a total systems review, much like the Go report of the past? Such a review could aim to change the attitudes of parents, teachers, and students towards examinations and grades. It will take time. But the best way to do so is for all our schools and institutes of higher learning to give due weightage to aptitude testing. Not just grades, but what is the aptitude of each student? And that's very much at the core of today's motion. Mr. Speaker, our schools must move away from having a top-down culture, a one-size-fits-all curriculum, age-based cohorts, and streamings based on standardized exams. And they must never become self-perpetuating closed circles, as the Prime Minister noted in this House in May. Second, let me say a bit more about neighborhood primary schools and Raffles Institution. Let us never forget the contributions of neighborhood primary school teachers. My colleagues and I have separately spoken to a few, and the stories of one has rung true with me. Mr. Kumaran Veera is the head of department at Concord Primary School in Choa Chu Kang. He teaches primary 5 and primary 6 students, and Concord has consistently improved over the years because of him and his colleagues in its applied learning and learning for life programs. And they've made the news. But what made me sit up when speaking to Mr. Kumaran and his colleagues was the stories that they had beyond just the rankings, beyond just the APL or LLP programs. Kumaran's stories are not of children who are bored in class because of too much tuition. They are stories of bright girls and boys who sit at the back of class and sometimes don't even come to school because their parents don't encourage them to turn up at school. Stories of him and others visiting the houses of such students and using tough love, Mr. Speaker, to encourage these students to attend schools. And tough love on the parents as well to send them to school. It helps that Mr. Kumaran is more than 6 feet tall and is built like a disciplined master should be. But I congratulate every neighborhood primary school like Concord that continues to make a difference. Like Kumaran, I'm proud to come from a neighborhood primary school myself. I graduated from primary school from Princess Elizabeth Primary School. Contrary to its name, Princess Elizabeth Primary School has nothing to do with the United Kingdom. It's named after a RI has held itself out to be one of the best schools, but not because it put itself always out to be that, but because none of us came from a feeder primary school, Mr. Speaker. No one dared to think when they entered RI in Sec 1 that they were the best in the class, a subject or a sport, because we had no idea who may be better than you. We were all just equals coming there. Your path was never paved for you. You worked hard to earn your own reputation. My schoolmates could not have been from more diverse backgrounds or sensibilities. I was less concerned when the Prime Minister raised in May that diversity has become an issue in Raffles Institution. That saddened me. And I'm happy to report that after speaking to vice principals and teachers at RI, that they have tried to take some swift action to combat this perception. RI has established a scholarship and a mentorship program for primary 5 and primary 6 students from across the country. I spoke to Mrs. Theresa Lai, a vice principal, who hopes that through this mentorship and scholarship programs, RI can play a part in the social mobility of these students with both financial support, but also through old school, older brother, older sister mentorship, where you'd have Sec 1 and Sec 2 students actually going to meet their counterparts or their juniors in primary school to encourage them. Although the mentors provide academic support, the larger idea is to work with these 9 and 10-year-olds in primary school to deal with the social, emotional stresses and what leadership skills actually involves. RI has also engaged the principals and teachers from primary schools to see how we can better support, or they can better support these students. This year, for example, the school had almost 60 primary schools represented in its yearly dialogue sessions. Through these engagement efforts, RI as a school tries to dispel the notion that it's an exclusive educational institution, not only for the bright children from wealthy backgrounds. It's a tough journey, partly because that is the assumption that many of us have, even those of us who have gone to the school. But frankly today, I would say that we do not attribute the success of RI as an institution to its famous British founder and his credos, but rather we look to famous Singaporean teachers, principals and vice principals. Few are more charismatic than Mr. Eugene Vijayasinghe. And I say his name because he was one of the first few people to inspire generations of Reflesians to say that you have to give back. It's not enough to just do well in school for yourself, not enough to hoard books at the library, not enough to ensure that your friends do well. The idea was always contribute back to society. Let me be clear. I have friends who have graduated from other secondary schools as well. I've arranged today of friends whom I met through national service or work, including graduates of Maristella High School, Chinese High, Victoria School, St. Andrews, and even those of the Anglo-Chinese school variety. But might I ask the ministry to invite other top secondary schools that I've just mentioned to also account what they are doing to ensure that social mobility is never frustrated, and that elite groups of Singaporeans and foreigners in these schools who emerge do not look out only for their own. The third and final point I want to touch on, Mr. Speaker, is how when we look at the future of education, it really is a call to see not only or stare into a crystal ball, but to think what are the benefits and advantages that Singaporean students will innately possess, partly because of our geography, partly because of the languages that we are encouraged to speak and that we do speak as a mother tongue, and what more that we can do. As an example, 10 years ago, in 2008, Australia came up with the Melbourne Declaration for primary school and secondary school education. And in that declaration, they said this: India, China, and other Asian nations are growing and the influence on the world is increasing. Australians need to become Asia literate, engaging in building strong relationships with Asia. I think they've tried to do precisely that. Today, they suggest that they too, maybe one day, soon, should be a member of the 10-member ASEAN bloc. So they become part of Southeast Asia and not just Asia. When that is the reality for Australia, which started this idea 10 years ago, what precisely are we doing within our education system at the primary and secondary school levels to ensure that our students are Asia literate? They are Singapore literate. They speak Singlish, they speak very good English. They can understand smatterings of the 3 languages beyond English that are our national languages. But are we doing more to ensure that they understand what really makes Asia tick? Because that has to start at the secondary school level. With our advantages as a leading Southeast Asian nation, with clear interests in cross-border trade and investment, I urge that we ensure that secondary schools, JCs, and IHLs at university contribute to this goal of ensuring this should be in some way at a secondary school or junior college level be reduced, distilled, and imparted to students. It's very good that we teach Cold War, current affairs. It's very good that we teach about early Southeast Asian history in Thailand and Indonesia and Singapore. But we really have to think about what we can teach these students now that prepares them for trade and investment going forward. Today's motion, Mr. Speaker, is dedicated to Singapore's children, whom we want to be future ready, and to the teachers who have made us who we are today. Sir, I beg to move.